right over here. And of course, the decline of the knight was because of improved tactics of infantry. The Roman Empire was an infantry-based military. Then when the feudal era happened, you had the knight dominating the battlefield, the heavy cavalry charge. Towards the early modern period, you had the common infantry being once again taking control of the battlefield. And what they would do is they would manipulate the battleground to their advantage, digging holes, better discipline amongst the ranks. Of course, for the cavalry to be able to charge, it was broken up because of these huge holes. Horses are not going to be able to run in a straight line if there's big old gaps into the land. What some historians argue is the Battle of Agincourt marked as the beginning of the decline of the knights. So as we see here, this would be the English longbow, I would say, on the... Well, this is our artist's interpretation. But so the English longbow. And in order to shoot an English longbow, imagine you have two dumbbells. On your left dumbbell is 100 pounds, and on your right, 50 pounds. That is considered the draw of the bow. And they say that a skilled archer can fire off about 10 arrows a minute, while an English longbowman can fire 20. And the tremendous amount of strength that was needed to shoot this bow took a lifetime to train for. The English longbowmen became the majority of the English fighting force. They had if there was about 10,000 men in the English army, 6,000 of them were longbowmen. So when you get the Battle of Agincourt, where you have the English longbow, they set themselves up to a narrow battlefield, and what's separating them from the French knights is mud, and the arrogance of the French knights decided, yeah, we got this. And the first charge, they were slowed down because of mud and turned into pin cushions. And then the second wave said, I think we got this. And so on and so forth. And of course, the incorporation of gunpowder. This was one of the big paradigm changes within military, is incorporation of gunpowder. Gunpowder was invented in China, ironically, as an attempt to create an elixir for immortality. The Chinese used gunpowder for fireworks, rockets, and some firearms. And when the Europeans started using gunpowders for cannons, which would obliterate castle walls, because let's face it, if you had to besiege a castle, it's a lot easier to use a cannon to blow down the walls rather than waiting months, maybe a year, to wait out each other, see who is going to be able to force one another to yield. And of course, when you get to the handgun, which of course they call it handgun because the possibility of the firearm blowing up, it created a lot of smoke, chaos on the battlefield, loud sounds. And of course, the bullet would be able to puncture through the armor of a knight. And of course, a rise of professional armies. What I mean by professional armies is mercenaries. And the two major mercenary groups was the Landsknecht. They utilized what's called a pike and shot formation. So as we see an example of the pike and shot formation of Landsknecht, you have the halberdiers right down here. And on the flanks, on the outside, you'd have the arquebusier, which is the gunman. And you would have the pikes, which the pike is about 22 feet high, long spear. So, as we see with this gentleman right here, he is wielding a Zweihander, which three-handed weapon, a big old great sword. So pretty much that gentleman's job is to try to break the formation of the pikes. So the Swiss pikemen were often their adversaries, their rivals in terms of a superior fighting force in conflicts. So that gentleman with his Zweihander, he would get double the pay, but most likely live half as long. So you're twice the worth of living half as long. And his job was to try to cut through the pikes, and that would allow the halberdiers to rush in to try to break the formation. Now, the difference between the tactics of Landsknechts and the Swiss pikemen was the Landsknechts were more defensive, whereas the Swiss pikemen were more offensive in their battle formations, as we can see example of the fighting right over here. You have like the Zweihanders and the halberds trying to break one another. Now, an interesting fact that with this sword right here, the only sources we have about how it is used comes from Iberian swordsman called Montante, which was used by bodyguards to protect their client. And when you get that thing swinging, it's not going to really stop. And of course, it's great to keep your opponents away. You can just keep cutting. That momentum will allow you to create this protective barrier between you and your client. The pike and shot, that is a battle formation. You see all those pikes? Those are all pikes. On the outskirts, you have the handgunners. So for the arquebusier, a skilled one can fire arquebusier 3 shots a minute. So you'd have this long column where one person would fire and just go back to the line while they're loading. Fire, load, so you get this chain of fire. And as you can see, the cavalry here. Now, horses are smart. If they see a bunch of spears, they're not going to charge into it, despite what you see in the movies. So what will happen is in the earlier conflicts where the knight would try to charge, the horse would just stop immediately. Nope, I'm not doing that. And the knight would go flying into the pikes. So they just realize, oh, well, it's no good to try to charge in and get stabbed by a bunch of these pikes. So you'd have the cavalry armed with pistols ride up, shoot their pistols to soften them up, pepper them, and right away. And this became the dominant form of combat in the early modern period. It required a tremendous amount of time to train people how to march in a line or march in as a group. And here's an example of the progression of the European armor. As we can see in the 1100s, the Norman invasion, which was mostly male, and the quote-unquote knight right there is using a spear, and he would have a sword. And then when you get to 1250, the knight is using a sword and shield. And right here is a form of a falchion. And what this knight right here is wearing what's called brigadine, which is a coat of plates. And of course, we move to the 1400s where you have full chest plate. And the reason why the chest plate was more popular than brigadine was the fact that it was able to distribute the force of impact better. And as you can see here, the 1450s, you have full plate and more intricate Maximilian armor. And of course, we see the difference in helms. This is for like knights, for jousting tournaments. I got some examples I'll show you. And of course, the progression of armor was the match, and the more intricate armor comes to when the knights are being phased out, and it became more of for parades and displaying. So here where I was talking about the Maximilian armor, we see the fluted designs. That makes the armor a bit stronger to resist impact. Now, when you're wearing full plate, you're pretty much a walking tank. And despite popular belief, swords cannot cut through armor. Impact weapons like maces, hammers, that can do a tremendous amount of damage against someone in full plate. The concussive force of a hammer rings through the body, and there's tests done where you can see that the force of the impact is crushing ribs and bones and nasty stuff. And of course, what peasants had to rely on is get 4 or 5 of their buddies to jump a knight, and in the weak points, like under the armpit, the groin, and the neck, hammer in knives. But that being said, you don't always want to kill a knight. They're worth money. They will be a hefty reward if you capture a knight and ransom them. And here's an example of the armor of the tilt, which is for jousting. You'll see that the visor is more enclosed, and right here you'll see the protection for where to mount a shield. And knights would have 3 sets of armor. We have right here is one for jousting tournaments, and it's less mobile than field armor. For example, this right here. The more intricate the armor, the more likely it's for parade, because let's face it, suit of armor is expensive. It's the supreme bespoke suit of its time. Meaning, I don't know if you've ever been fitted for a suit, but requires a amount of measurements, time, and it was expensive. Here's